You know, when it comes down to it, if you're a body switching Lovecraftian demon, really any flesh is suitable flesh. Just wanted to point that out. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. And folks, I am very pleased to have with me today director Joe Lynch. Now, one of the many things that's so much fun about this interview is Joe was listening to my podcast before he even had his first film produced. So we have yet another listener who's made it into the podcast. Today, we are talking about Suitable Flesh, which is quite a fun film. And if you have not yet seen it, I think it's still in some theaters, but it's also on VOD. And in January 2024, it's going to be released on Blu-ray. So you'll be able to hear commentaries, you'll be able to get deleted scenes, and I highly suggest you see Joe's movie Suitable Flesh, because at the end of the day, we like promoting independent filmmakers and films, and this is independent horror, so it's the icing on the cake for all you indie fans. And this is a funky little film. It features a script by Dennis Paoli, who wrote for Stuart Gordon, yes, the Reanimator team, and Joe took this over. As you'll hear, it was originally going to be directed by Stuart Gordon, but after he passed away, Joe was passed the torch for this film, and he does not disappoint. Suitable Flesh is currently available on VOD. It's still in a few movie theaters, but you could find it anywhere you are on VOD. And then in January 2024, it's coming out on Blu-ray, so you'll get commentaries, deleted scenes, stuff like that. And it's also going to go into the streaming app Shudder. But it was great to have Joe in the Q&A, and he was so generous with his time, so I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, folks, you could read Backstory over at backstory.net or in our iPad app called Backstory. You know, the important thing to remember is Backstory Magazine is a perfect gift to give these holidays, and you could give a gift subscription to anyone you so desire. Now that the strikes are over, we are hard at work on issue 50, but we're not making you wait for it. Subscribers have access to any of our articles that are complete. The minute that they are completed, they go into issue 49.5, and then when we publish issue 50, they will be moved into issue 50, which is where they will permanently reside. And don't worry, if you're confused, I've confused quite a few publicists telling them the same thing, but the truth of the matter is we're digital magazines. So when we finish a story, generally we're not going to make you wait for it. We want you to see it, especially if it's of a film that's coming out in theaters or a TV show that's debuting. Now, the icing on the cake for you, if you want to give a gift subscription or if you want a subscription for yourself, is I'm offering you discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5. And if you've never read us before, you could test drive us by reading our free issue. So look, I really hope that my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where all these episodes that I record on Zoom go, I really hope you will consider becoming a subscriber, because it would mean a lot to me, and I thank you for supporting independent film journalism. But now let's jump right into our interview with director Joe Lynch about his latest film, Suitable Flesh.
Let's
Joe, it's good to see you, man. How you doing?
Like I was saying before, this is a bit of a rite of passage. Having listened to the podcast now, I feel like the beginning. I've been listening to all of the interviews and the wonderful format that you've done. I mean, are you still doing them live at the school?
The pandemic slowed us down.
Change things up.
But no, that first off, I'll get to that in a second, but it's awesome that you've been listening since the beginning. That makes you, I believe, our 38th, because this is before you had directed your first film, right?
Yeah,
that makes you the 38th person that went from podcast listener to being in the podcast, which is really cool. So you're number 38, kid.
It is an honor. I'm going to get a t-shirt that says just number 38. People are going to go, what's 38? I'm like, if you know, you know.
If you know, you know. It's weird. The pandemic, look, the podcast started in 2005. I've kept it going continuously ever since. I had been doing a lot of screenings at the LA Film School. 2 days before the pandemic was the last screening that I did at the LA Film School. Right.
Which one was
the lockdown started, and everybody was already nervous then, but we decided to do it and like told our people that like we're coming, don't show up if you know you're feeling at all ill. You know, that went off without a hitch, but like they're redoing stuff in the theater electronically that they need fixed. I've done a few for sure. I just haven't done one there, and we're talking about maybe doing one in 2024. But honestly, Zoom has been awesome because especially when I get filmmakers that are like not in Los Angeles, it allows us to keep, you know, the podcast has gone continuously this whole time, obviously. And I've taken these Zooms and put them on YouTube, as people know, under the Backstory Magazine YouTube page so they could see us on these Zooms. But yeah, like I'm going to keep podcasting no matter what happens.
All right. So two things. One, as a backstory aficionado myself, I loved what you were doing with that for so long. It was as a filmmaker, screenwriter myself, to be able to delve into the minutia of not just formatting and not just story structure, like what you were able to do, especially in like the digital format, was great because who reads magazines anymore. So it was great to have PDFs. Two things I want to mention. One, I don't want to call you out on it, but because you were mentioning about how your last screening, so to speak, before the pandemic, our last screening, because I do a podcast as well called The Movie Crypt.
Absolutely.
And the same thing, when the pandemic hit, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. And then we kind of, made a lot of lemonade, because you're right. Being able to talk to people that couldn't come into our office or come into our studio was great. Our reach just went so much wider. The first person that I reached out to, just because I was like, you know what, this would never happen otherwise, was Abel Ferrara.
Oh,
and
wow,
shockingly, awesome. He said 20 minutes. Like, well, it's that's what the email said. But as you can hear it, you can hear like 40 minutes. And it ended up turning into like a 2-hour call, which was great because it's Abel Ferrara. But the reason why I brought that up was because we did like a screening series as well for Movie Crypt, and we would do it at the Alamo Draft House. And the last one that we did the night before everything shut down was for Bobcat Goldthwait's God Bless America.
Nice.
And I mentioned to him, because I was a fan, I mentioned to him the infamous interview that you had done with him way back when you mentioned Hot to Trot.
Yeah.
And now I unabashedly love that movie.
Oh, yeah.
I know, as we know, he does not. But every time that I put it on, like when my wife and I put it on in the background, or like it just happened to be on, I send him a picture of it. And I usually just get back like scary faces or like, middle fingers or whatever. But the way that you had to traverse through that interview is highly commendable, sir. Like that was that was not a good room that night.
Well, you know what though? I mean, like, here's the most terrifying part of that. Well, two things, because thanks for the kudos on Backstory Magazine. We got paused during the writer's strike because we couldn't interview writers. So we published issue 49.5 because I could not bring myself to call it issue 50 without freaking writers in it. So we had all these interviews that had built up right before the strike that were going to go into issue 50 anyhow. So that's what went into 49.5. And now we're actually working on issue 50, which is great because
that's great.
The strike is over. It just means we can't have actors in this issue until their strike is over. And hopefully that'll be over.
Hey, that's why you're talking to me right now, because, well, like up until a point, and with Suitable Flesh coming out at this particular moment, I'm the only one who can kind of get out there and do the Dog and Pony show, which is, look, I get to talk to you, so this worked out great.
No, this is perfect. But the other thing is on Hot to Trot, that wasn't, obviously, for anyone that's listening to this that doesn't know, go seek out the Bobcat Goldthwait interview that I did, because, we were talking about a different film. It was not World's Greatest Dad, which is really one of his masterpieces. It was the one he did after that. And I decided to bring up Hot to Trot just on a whim, and I did not expect him to react that way. Although I knew he wasn't in love with it, I just thought that, like, it's always interesting years later, once you think the wounds have healed, to be able to peel back and learn what was going on. And the stories that he told about the horse having explosive diarrhea, I mean, like, those were hilarious. But what happened was, even though I'd interviewed him before, he for some reason thought that I was fucking with him. His comedian instinct kicked in. Yes. And looked at me as a heckler for a moment. And so meanwhile, I never attack guests. Like, I don't talk about anybody's trauma. But so meanwhile, my problem was, I'm like, do I fight or flee? And I'm always a fighter, but I want to be respectful. So he started leaning into it, like saying, okay, we're not going to talk about the movie at hand. We're going to only talk about Hot to Trot.
Exactly.
And then I'm like, well, this is a dare. The main reason it was a dare was because the only time that I had seen Hot to Trot before that was when I was partially inebriated in high school. And
as you should be.
Right. And I'm racing to remember it. And suddenly it's all coming back to me in these weird moments. So I'm like, okay, I could go toe to toe on this. I'm going to ask respectful questions about Hot to Trot. Like, I'll play that game because it's going to be a great game to play. And he was surprised that I kept going with him. And he had the greatest answers ever. And it was really funny because, like, I ran into him, I swear to you, 2 nights later at a different movie. And we just kind of laughed about it. And I said, what you did was monumental. And he's like, was it? And actually, no, it was a few weeks later because the podcast was already out. And I told him that I was getting people writing in saying that, like, they want me to do a Hot for Trot only episode, and like people were just loving it. And he thought it was really funny. He's like, I went to some other event and somebody from your screening was there and they said they couldn't believe how harsh I was on you, but they loved every minute of it. And he's like, I don't know where I was in my head either. And it was just funny. Like I would love to have him back because I think Bobcat's like a great filmmaker. I hope he keeps making movies just on the
Yeah,
level
me too.
of what he's done, because like World's Greatest Dad is just a tragic work of genius, and just it's such a great movie. But I want to get to you. Like I want to get to
Yes.
your breaking in story just briefly. Your first feature was Wrong Turn 2, Dead End.
Yes.
Right. And so
Yep.
this is like 2007. You'd been doing music videos. Like, if you could bring it down to one lesson, what would you say was a lesson that you learned walking away from that helped you with your other work?
Well, in terms of Wrong Turn 2, I was in to give you a little bit of the backstory with that. I had, long story short, befriended this guy named Luke Rivet, who was a friend of a friend who was living in Australia. And my friend said, hey, can you pick up my friend from LAX? And I had just gotten to LA. And, when someone says, can you pick up a friend from LAX? And I'm living in the Valley, I had no clue that it was going to be an hour and a half endeavor. But I'm like, okay, that sounds great. So drive to LAX, pick this Australian guy up, drop him off at a hostel, and then we kind of became friendly, here and there. And then I was in Tokyo shooting drift racing for G4 when I get this text, and it's from Luke, and he goes, "Hey, listen, so I'm working at Anonymous Content right now, and they had this big like script meeting or whatever, and they had pitched that Wrong Turn 2 was in the works, and there was a script out there. Would you want to read it?" And immediately I went, "Absolutely yes!" Not just for the opportunity, but I really loved the first Wrong Turn. I was one of the 3 people at the ArcLight seeing Wrong Turn 1. When everyone else was seeing Finding Nemo, I was there watching Cannibal Hillbillies. And I loved it because it had that throwback nature of a lot of the 70s films like The Hills Have Eyes and Cannibal Holocaust. These are films that Rob Schmidt actually referenced. And I thought, like, God, I really enjoyed the fact that this was a studio film that almost felt unleashed at the time. So he sends me the script, and I liked it, but I had no stake in the game at all. Like I was just like, who the hell am I? I'm probably 11 or 12 on the list. And when they brought me up again, they had seen, I had done a music video for this band called Strapping Young Lad. And I had done this as an Evil Dead 2 homage. They must have seen that enough where, they went, oh, okay, he must know something about horror. So I was probably like 11 on the list of top 10 that the executive brought up. So when I read it, I liked it, but again, like I wasn't putting on kid gloves when I had any notes or any thoughts or whatever. For example, the opening of the film, where if you've seen the movie, it ends with this. Ultimately, it was going to be an American Idol contestant who gets split in half and her entrails fall out of her vagina, and the 2 hillbillies walk off with her into the sunset. And immediately from the script, it said cut to black. And I went, no, 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 no. As a fan, I really want to see it go further. Like I just putting on my fan hat, not like, what could I do? What was the budget? Like, I just went, all my notes were purely from a fan of both the film, of the genre. And that's what fueled me throughout that entire production. Because I felt like if I'm ever going to get a chance to make one movie, that was always my goal coming out here, even, all the way back when I was a little kid. I wanted just to if I can make one feature film, put my stamp on it. And this was an opportunity. The script felt like a vessel for me to be able to put every crazy, fucked up idea. And I don't know if you remember this, Jeff, but at the time, and this is in the mid aughts or like the sort of the late aughts, unrated films on DVD were a gold mine.
Yeah.
So if you could slap unrated on a DVD box, the studio was just like, great, we have another version. We can, we can put it out there as another version. If you don't like it, you can make it a deleted scene or what have you. So I just went with my pure id, and every note that I had to Alan Turing, the 2 writers who were on it, who were writers on Smallville, they did a really good job with like cracking the code. But I, as a potential director, were like, but what if we did this? And what if the old man, that you had just had to have as a gas station attendant, in the script, what if it was the old man from the first film, which makes you then go, oh my God, he was in on it the whole time.
That's a good
All
connection.
these little
That's
things.
cool.
Yeah. The thing that I learned the most from that movie was that I had to be fearless in the pitching approach to it. And look, this has happened in subsequent films where I would sit there and go, and even with Suitable Flesh, I would go, now I could give this note, but this note could deprive me from being in the running for the job. And whenever I've said, screw it, just put it out there, let the chips fall where they may, it's in most cases yielded me the job. the opportunity. And in the end, like something that I'm really proud of. Like I'm still to this day, I'm so proud of that movie because I can see that movie and like I can still watch it to this day and go, that's someone who gave no fucks. And someone who was like, I might never do this again, but I might as well satisfy every splatterpunk sensibility that I had from when I was growing up and reading Fangoria and going, one day I'll make a movie. And that was it.
At the end of the day, the concept of best idea wins always permeates into Hollywood. It works. But your note was interesting. It wasn't you coming in trying to wear too big of a director's hat and just talking, oh, this shot and that shot and this lens, which, by the way, all important things. You were dictating straight to story, even though you weren't the writer. And like directors who have a good understanding of story and characters, they're always going to win. I forgot to ask, did you study this? Did you go to film school?
I went to Syracuse University. I've been writing since I was 8, and I went to school for both writing and directing. And I felt like learning from like the Robert Rodriguez school of know every discipline, from the writing side to the directing side to the shooting side to the editing side. I wanted to know all of it. And I always felt like writing being such a huge component of it, if it's not directly my script that's on the page, it still becomes a game of telephone where I now have to take the baton and run with it. And as we know, sometimes studios and producers or whoever don't like to have the writer on set sometimes, or they sometimes go like, well, you can punch it up. We don't need to send it to the writer. And that's happened more than a few times. So I've always felt comfortable within the means of respecting the writers too, to be able to, like do a polish or, but that said, I've always reached out to them. I've always sent them the script and said, like, what do you think of this? And I think there is a level of respect that comes with that, where in most cases, actually, I can't really think of a time that it's kind of backfired on me, where I'll pitch an idea and they go for it. That's fine. It's like, do your thing. Like a lot of times they go, it's in your hands now. And I've never not felt comfortable doing that. Like if we need a punch up the night before, I'm on final draft, punching it up. I've always wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page, literally. But having that discipline, because I know that there's some directors who are like, that's not my job. Like I can't do that, or I don't feel comfortable doing that. I've always felt comfortable doing that. I mean, the only script that I've ever had produced that I've written was Everly. But obviously, I would love to have more of them. But in most cases, what's interesting, and this kind of stems from listening to your show a lot. I am not the greatest writer. I feel like I'm a very strong rewriter. I need to have a draft in front of me. The blank page scares the shit out of me, but a page that has all of the goods and all the ingredients in there, and then I can massage and polish, again, within reason and within respectability. But that's always been, I feel like, one of my strengths is that I'm able to kind of take what's there and either make it better,
that's a special relationship. I mean, you need to have consent from your writers. It's always going to work best if they're understanding of that process, which they should be. Because, I mean, film at its best is always a collaborative medium. And some directors, as you said, I've found that it's not always, oh, it's not my job. It's a little more of, I'm not going to get paid to do it, so I don't give a shit. And the problem there is actually that it kind of is your job if you see like a way to improve the movie that you're making. And it's okay that you're not going to get paid to do it. You're the director. The way the arbitration process works with the WGA is you need to prove that you have a 30% contribution on an analysis of draft to draft. And if you're directing, it has to be 50%. So some directors won't get involved. Also, some directors don't care. I mean, we're going to talk about that because, on this film, Suitable Flesh, I know that you did some rewrites as well, because I know some of the elements. I was at your Beyond Fest screening, which was a blast. And I know some of the things that you added that weren't in Dennis Paoli's script. But at the same time, Dennis Paoli has sole credit here. Like you were riffing, and like that's what great musicians do. So it makes perfect sense. So just to get it straight, you were at Syracuse for film, not theater, right?
Yeah. Well, Syracuse has, I hope they still have this, they have two factions of the film program. They have film art and film drama. Okay. The film art side kind of leaned more towards cinematography and the more technical side of that, and where film drama was more directing and acting and writing. Cool. And when that crossroads was there and I had to make a decision, I felt like no matter what, I'm going to be on set and I'm going to need to know the ins and outs of this Bolex camera or this Bolu. I know that based on the discipline, it's going to be
talking
me,
like an old man now.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm going to be using that old Steenbeck. But
Film's never going
I
away.
knew that exactly, and I knew that by necessity and almost by force that I was going to have to know how to use that camera and know how to use the the editing facilities.
Yeah.
And I was already interested in that sort of thing, but I really wanted to get into the deeper dive of what it takes to talk to actors, what it takes to find tone through characters and through the writing. So that's the side that I went on, and I'm so glad I did because it also forced me to act more. And I think every director needs to put themselves in a role or get cast in something or even just take a class
Yeah.
because there is nothing, scarier than having and I've been there before as an actor, having a director go, it's not that. I'm like, yeah, but what? Steer me in the right way. And if you can at least communicate to your actor roughly what you're looking for, there's a level of respect that you get, and ultimately you get a better effect if you're able to speak on their terms instead of the old George Lucas, just do that faster. It's like,
Right.
hey, you know what? Sometimes that works, but having at least that acumen served me so much better because look, I know that we're going to be hiring a DP and we're going to have a whole crew that's going to lean on that technical side. I love to shoot as well, but I think it's more important at the end of the day to make sure that you find truth in your actors and truth in your story because that's the basis for all of this. You can have a beautiful looking image and you can have a completely empty storyline or you can have a completely vapid performance. And you know what? That deflates everything.
That's a great way to say it. And, I went to SC for film. I almost went to Syracuse, but I went to SC and I was there for theater and film. So I was always, when I was there, I was always trying to bridge the two departments because it was so strange to me that the film school's kids were just casting their friends when there's a whole legit theater program. And it's like, dude, walk across the street, get kids that are dedicated to acting, stop casting your dumbass roommate. But the class that they all feared in film school was directing actors in which
Really?
film school, well, but wait, the film school kids had to act. So it was an acting class where directing candidates and people that were studying for that, they had to act and they had to then do exactly what you said, which is understand what it's like to be an actor, which then in turn, legitimately, I've always felt would make them better directors because they knew what it's like to get incomprehensible direction as an actor. When they, as actors, understood the scene and the director wasn't sure what to tell them. So what you're talking about is totally sensible. And I think it's great to learn all the departments. And we're going to get to suitable flesh in a few, but obviously it's so funny that you mentioned Abel Ferrara because I had him in the podcast a while back.
I know.
And he made fun of this question of mine that I'm going to ask to you. It's just funny you mentioned it because I wanted to at least, I had him for, I believe, Siberia, which was a film he made recently. And when I was asking about some of his earlier works, I had to go through them because the point was to, get him talking about Siberia. But so, I'm going to ask you what your biggest lesson on Mayhem was. But Abel Ferrara, by the second time I asked that question, he's like, you and the what's your lessons again, huh? That's what you're asking me? What was your biggest lesson? So yes, I am now asking you the question that Abel Ferrara just loved. What was your biggest lesson on Mayhem? A movie that I really love. It just had a great tone. It's really unhinged, and you just nailed it. It was a turning point because I think a lot of people discovered your work with Mayhem. It wasn't like people were unaware before that, but I think it was a definite turning point for you. What was your biggest lesson on Mayhem?
The biggest lesson that I learned on Mayhem, because I was at a turning point in my career as well. And I will speed plot through this. After Wrong Turn 2, I ended up working on a film called Knights of Badassdom, which was a complete disaster due to a Ponzi scheme. But I can look back at it honestly and say that I might have had a little hubris. I thought here's my next big feature. I can't make a sophomore slump. And I put so much pressure on myself that I was that typical shot that you would see in the second act when your hero on their journey has hit a low point and they're in the shower and the water's cascading down on them and they're fully clothed. I had Zoloft in my pocket at all times because I was having panic attacks incessantly. So it was bad, but I learned a lot from that because I had Don Coscarelli on our podcast a year later when I was going through hell. And when he mentioned how Beastmaster, one of my favorite movies as a kid, went through the same thing, it taught me that no matter what, after you've finished the film, it's not your film anymore. So there's going to be people who love your film and you hate it. And there's going to be people that, you make this amazing film that you think, you love, and then everybody else doesn't. Cinema is subjective. and
Right.
that was a big lesson there. And then I did Everly, which is essentially, if you look at that movie, it is a metaphor for me being in a box and me shooting my way out of that box, because the whole film is set in one room. But when I got to Mayhem, I had a new family at that point. I was trying to make ends meet. The indie film world is not the kind that keeps you buoyed, with
Right.
residual checks and development deals and everything. So I had to go back to work. So I ended up working a corporate job at the time, and it was miserable. I was in a really bad state of mind.
What was the
So
job?
I was at the time, because I used to work at G4. G4 turned into, through corporate
Yeah.
merging, it turned into the Esquire network, the
Yep.
Bespoke Mails network. It
That
wasn't
lasted.
great. I was a promo director, so I was making all their commercials. A little bit creative,
Yeah.
but it was still going through the corporate. I felt like a cog. So when Mayhem came to me, it was as if someone had honed in, irised in on my life and how I was feeling at that time. And, what Matthias had done with that script, again, there was a lot that was in there on the page. But then when I got it, I got to infuse so much more. The coffee mug, that's right out of being on the seventh floor and going, who stole my coffee mug? Shit
Right.
like that. All of the dialogue, the let's discuss of it all. There was so many moments that were literally ripped from that job. And at that point, and I didn't even realize it with Everly, but I feel like my strengths as a director is that I'm always going to, and at least the ones that I feel I've been the most successful with, are opportunities where I can be as personal as possible. Now, you can watch Mayhem and not know any of that and hopefully enjoy it on its own laurels. But I can look at that movie and see that was incredibly therapeutic. And every film that I've done in one form or another is me satiating that kind of therapy and putting every drop of blood, sweat, and tears, but also my mindset. And with Mayhem, I truly learned that I am my best when I am siphoning from real life, and I'm siphoning from all of the hardship and all the heartbreak and all the
Yeah.
pain and the trials and the tribulations from it. I'm putting that all on screen. The other thing that I learned from this, and you would appreciate this, and this kind of goes back to how a director sometimes really needs to know how to write. So there's a scene in the movie where Steven and Samara, in the script, it literally said, interior hallway day, Derek and Melanie wait for the siren. That's it. That's the whole thing. So long story short, we were shooting this all in Serbia, and we were all kind of stuck together. We found this one building that literally only gave us 2 floors, but we had to redress back and forth. So we made
Right.
2 floors look like 10 floors. So we were being very economical. And it was the end of the day, and we actually ended early. And my DP, Steve Gaynor, and I were like, well, why don't we go upstairs and why don't we pre-light for the next day so we can really hit the ground running? And at that point, I had done a movie in Serbia already. So we all knew each other. We were like a little merry band of pirates. And we were like, let's do it. So we go upstairs. And because the van was late, Steven and Samara, who we had had formulated this wonderful bond with the 3 of us, they were just like, well, do you need stand-ins? And we're like, yeah. Do you want to come upstairs and hang out with us? Sure. So we go upstairs, and I told Steven to go in one room, and I told Samara to go in the other room. They were like co-joining bathrooms that were on opposite sides of each other. And I just went, just to break the ice, because I always do this thing where I always make playlists for the actors just so they get into their character a little bit.
Sure.
And I said, favorite band, go. Favorite band, go. Just to see what would come out of their mouths. And I was talking to Steven and Samara. What came out of their mouths was their characters' favorite bands. And they
Interesting.
went on a riff for 10 minutes. So everything that was there was purely off the top of the dome. And I remember going, oh my God, this is gold right here. So got in the van finally, went home and typed up a 3-page new scene. Now, if you go to any production and on the breakdowns, it says like an eighth of a page, right?
Right.
When the first AD is breaking it down.
Yeah.
The first AD is looking at it like, you know what? That'll take an hour. I hand them almost 3 pages of new dialogue, and the first AD had a conniption fit. But then I handed it to Steven and Samara, who both were, kind of came up through TV, and they went, cool, let's do it. And if I didn't have the wherewithal and the confidence to just siphon what I grabbed from that little impromptu moment between them and run home and type it out and make it feel like a clean, kind of character friendly version of what they had said, I wouldn't have what's ostensibly a lot of people's favorite scene. So I think, in terms of Mayhem, the biggest lessons that I learned were, one, always shoot from the heart in terms of being personal with your stuff. Like, let it be personal. There's nothing wrong with infusing yourself as much as possible into your work, whether it's on the page or on the screen, but also roll with the punches, because sometimes some of the stuff that you don't expect is going to happen will happen so gloriously that you just have to harness that. You have to be able to harness that. And if you have the skill set, because I think at one point, one of the producers even said, like, do you want to call Matthias and do it? I'm like, we don't have time. I'm literally 8 hours ahead from everyone else in the world. By the time I send this stuff to him and he gets it back, we're on the next scene the next day.
Right.
I had to do it myself. I sent it to him and showed him and everything. He's like, this is good. Did you write this? I'm like, kind of. It was mostly the actors. But in trusting them, we ended up having what's, to me at least, my favorite scene in the movie.
What you're focusing on here is like one of the other true secrets of writing and directing, which is storytelling, in which it's always going to be better if you make it personal, because it always needs to be specific. Sometimes people try and emulate what they see in movies that they love, and they forget the specificity that led the movie down that path and made them love it. So getting something personal into a movie is just going back to that concept of you need to stand for something or fall for everything. You need to have a reason why the audience connects to these characters rather than just man of action or other cliches. There needs to be a hook. And so the band stuff that you're talking about is absolutely a hook. So
that's where the argument of AI as screenwriter, I don't think it'll ever fully apply, because every great script that we've read, every great movie that we've watched or whatever, started with an organic seed of pain in one form or another. Heartbreak, you lost your job, a death in the family. It's always come from a real place that I don't think, at least right now, I don't think a computer has, or an algorithm has fully experienced enough to be inspired to go, I need to write that down.
Not to get too derailed, like only because it's been so much a big topic lately. It was a part of the WGA strike. I think that the day will come in which it flips. Sometimes you can't stop technology, right? Like I'm just reminded of the man versus machine races to like tunnel through a hill and those things that were happening at like the dawn of the industrial age. I think when writers use the tool themselves, and with their consent, they're training the tool on their own philosophies and stuff like that, eventually there might be a space where a writer can find a way to harness and personally control AI. We're looking at it from the other side, where the studios are trying to use AI to generate IP, which is like the silliest thing ever, because there are more scripts out there than can ever be produced. So like there's no shortage of IP, literally no shortage. So they're just looking at it from the wrong place. Maybe in the future, maybe in a decade, AI could be something that a writer or creator.
Absolutely. I'm not against it at all in terms of it being a tool that a creative person can harness and use to their advantage. It's like having a new version of Final Draft that comes out and you're like, holy crap, this has made my job so much more exciting and maybe a little easier in certain formats and what have you. But if it's being used as a tool to extract the creativity out of someone and take it further, great. You just can't start with 4 or 5 keywords and go, all right, we have our next superhero movie. That's not how it's going to work. At least hopefully it's not how it's going to work effectively.
Well, and that's what we were just talking about getting those personal moments. That's why I think it'll be a tool for artists, where you have your own AI that you've entrusted with your own dream board that you fed it of the things that you like and the things that you're trying to go through. And it's your work and you have the rights to your work, rather than going through other people's work and stealing things, which is the way it currently is. So I think when it flips to a personal idea, it'll be something more interesting. But I want to gravitate towards today's movie, Suitable Flesh.
Yes.
Part of the seed for Suitable Flesh comes back to Stuart Gordon. And everybody knows him for his films adapting H.P. Lovecraft's Herbert West Reanimator into the classic film Reanimator, which he co-wrote with Dennis Paoli, who wrote Suitable Flesh. But Gordon went to University of Wisconsin for theater. And one of the things that I absolutely love about him is that toward his later years, he never gave up on theater. And he directed Nevermore, An Evening with Edgar Allan Poe with Jeffrey Combs, the star. Yeah, absolutely. And that was actually in the first issue of Backstory. We did this big interview with Jeffrey Combs about his one-man show for Edgar Allan Poe. I think it's fantastic. Like, I hope he gets back out there, performs it again, because he was doing it every year Halloween season for a while. And it's so great. I hope he publishes the script. But yeah, that's in the first issue of Backstory. But I love it. And like, Stewart eventually could still shock people on the stage. I don't know if you saw it, but in 2014, he directed a play at the Sacred Fools Theater here in Los Angeles called Taste.
I was there opening night.
Oh my God. And it's about the real life story of cannibalism in Germany. And Benjamin Brand wrote the script, and it was just freaking fantastic directing. I went with this couple that loved Stewart's work, and the boyfriend was a bit squeamish. And this is a play about cannibalism, and Stewart wanted to make it gory, but in a tasteful way. So you're not really sure. And there's like warnings for the audience, like you're going to see explicit stuff. You're not really sure how far it's going to go. And so Stewart started playing with the audience the way he plays with food, in which they're gay and they're like, let's watch some porn. And you're like, I wonder, this is a play. Are they going to show it? And so like, there's a computer monitor and they press play on a computer and you just hear like porn music. And it's like, oh, that's funny. And then like the music keeps playing and then he swings the monitor around. And now it's just like cheesy late 70s generic beginnings of a porn, right? So it's like the acting part. Nobody's naked. And it's like, okay. And then the screen turns back around. And then like the music keeps going in the background. The scene keeps going. And then the screen turns back around and it is 100% hardcore gay porn in front of, a regular ass audience. Some of the people in the audience clearly that was the first time in their lives they had ever seen such a thing and were just shocked. There were walkouts and it was, I was like, I can't believe he just did that. Like they're really using their, explicit warning, for theater to the hilt. And then by the middle of it, once the cannibalism started, which is these two people, one of them has a suicide wish and, they're going to eat him for dinner. That's the concept of the play and what happened in real life. It was so disturbing that the boyfriend of this girl that, I was with this couple, he just got up and walked out. And like, he was a 20-something kid that couldn't take this. And I was just
Stewart knew how to push those buttons, man.
It was so great. It was so great. And so I just want to call out, he was a great theater director as well. Let's get to Suitable Flesh. It's based on H.P. Lovecraft's Thing on a Doorstep. It's a demon possession movie, essentially, is the way to break it down without giving too much away. It makes it great for actors because they have to play themselves and other actors. Tell me how you came aboard to this after Stewart had passed away and what your first reactions were to Dennis Paley's screenplay.
I had first heard about the script from the man himself. I've been blessed enough to be allowed to come to those Masters of Horror dinners that Mick Garris started way back when, that I would always see pictures of and go, maybe someday. And then after Wrong Turn 2, Mick reached out and said, do you want to go? And I'm like, are you kidding? Like, even if I have to sit at the kids' table, like Adam Green and I would always call ourselves the masturbators of horror. Cause like, what are we doing there? In a table filled with Joe Dante and John Landis and Dario Argento and Michael Mann shows up sometimes. And, Del Toro's there. And I sat next to Stewart one night, a little bit, like I've been there a couple of times. We had seen each other and we got friendly and he was just always so nice and very encouraging to me. And one night he started talking about, cause I was, it's the typical thing that you do is like, so what are you doing now? And he mentioned that he was doing the Thing on the Doorstep. And he talked about it as if it was Elwood Blues, where it's like, we're getting the band back together. Because Dennis was already involved. He was working with Dennis and Brian Usna was going to be involved. I think at the time he was talking about Jeffrey being back and Barbara being back. It really was bringing that. I think that's that theater troupe sensibility that he had from the stage, where he just had his company and would bring them back for these particular projects. And with Lovecraft, he's done many of them, everything from Reanimator to From Beyond, Castle Freak, Dagon in certain respects. So for him to get the Cabal back was really exciting. As a fan, I just sat there and went, tell me everything about it. And this was obviously before he got sick. And
what year was this? If you
God, this was maybe back in 2015 or 16.
Okay.
Yeah, it was well before he died, but he and Dennis were working on this for a while. So unfortunately, he passed, and
in 2020.
And what's interesting is that, like, right after that, a couple months after that, when we were in the throes of the pandemic, Barbara Crampton emailed me, and Barbara had become a pretty prolific producer at this point. She was working with this company called AMP, and they had done films like Glorious and Jacob's Wife. And she sent me this email. We had become friendly as well in our circle of horror people. And she just reached out and said, hey, would you want to take a look at this? And I didn't know what it was. I just saw a little PDF at the bottom of the email. I'm like, what could this be? Click. And it said Thing on the Doorstep by Dennis Paoli. And my heart sank in one form because I was, holy crap, why is she asking me? Oh, is she asking me to be in it or like
Right.
give some notes or whatever? I didn't realize at first that she wanted me to direct it. So I was nervous about that, but also excited. And also the responsibility knowing about this project and who Stuart was. And I was such a huge Stuart Gordon fan since Reanimator, huge fan of his. He taught me so much about filmmaking and tone and just being able to push those buttons that it felt like a very daunting responsibility. So I read the script and again, very conflicted because I really liked where everything was going. But at the same time, it was missing something. And it's exactly what I was saying before, way back when in the beginning of the podcast, where you kind of sometimes have to go with your gut when you have these ideas that could possibly make you lose the gig. And now at the time, I was just starting to work with my writing partner, Becca. And at the time during the pandemic, she was in Europe and I was here. I sent it to her and she was 8 hours ahead. So I sent it to her and something just, when I finished it, I went, you know what's missing? There's a sense of danger and provocation that's missing that as a Stuart Gordon fan, I would almost hope and pray that he would have gone there or pushed someone to do this. And I thought, we have these two male protagonists and this one female antagonist. What if we flipped it? And not just to be provocative or just provocative for provocation's sake. It was more like there are much deeper themes in this day and age. That if we had these women at a certain age in a certain profession, that just sounds so much more exciting than the same old thing that Michael Douglas would have been cast in back in 1995. And I went, there's something there. It might lose me the job. So I sent it to Becca and I went to sleep. 8 hours later, she wrote back an 8-page thesis on why we should go that route. And immediately it solidified everything that made me excited about the project. So we sent that in to them thinking, you know what? No harm, no foul if you don't like this idea. Thank you for suggesting that I would be involved. Let's see what you think. And
Right.
shockingly, they came back and said, there's something here. Give me a couple weeks. Dennis went away and came back 3 weeks later. And that was the latest draft that we had where he didn't just go in and change the names in final draft.
Right.
He really dug deeper into the thematics of it. And it just made things so much more exciting and honestly dangerous. And it sucks to say that that's dangerous. You know what I mean? It shouldn't be dangerous that older women have sex and have dalliances outside of their marriage and the consequences therein. But that's just the day and age of where we are as a storytelling culture.
Strangely, it's a story that's less told. That's something that
Exactly.
I've always found strange. And like, I didn't even know that watching your movie. I remember it was male and I'm like, okay, that's like a good flip, but it just makes more sense as you watch the movie. Because like the she-devil nature of the original story, right? She's the provocateur, right? And she's using sex as her weapon. It actually intellectualizes it by making the doctors women here with this male who's trying to go for them. And it suggests like more of that spell that's being cast on them.
Well, I think it's just because we're so ensconced in an alpha male gaze perspective on these types of films, whether you're looking at film noir, which was primarily a male gaze, to a lot of the erotic thrillers that we watched, very male gaze. Every once in a while, you would have, a female director in there. But for the most part, the marketplace was going for, where's the tits and ass? That's not the route that we wanted to take. So by objectifying the sensibility from a female perspective and bring a female gaze into this, it just felt fresh. It felt like something that, honestly, when I read it, I went, that's a Stuart Gordon movie. That's what got us excited about it.
Do you remember any bullet points of that 8-page document where you were giving the argument for the gender swap?
It was mostly the idea of doing something that was more queer friendly, or if anything, queer based, because I like the idea that most of these movies have very male sensibility in the male gaze. What if we had it where the sexual fluidity side of it and the autonomy of gender became much more prevalent, which I don't think we could have gotten if we did it where it was two guys. And it felt very complacent. So a lot of that was just very eloquently, it was her way of explaining how if we flip it, here are all the advantages that we get to open up thematically. Because I don't think the themes would have been resonant if it was the two guys. I think the themes got much more relevant because it felt fresh and new. We wrote it all down and had all these bullet points and sent it in, and rest is history.
We'll talk about this more in the spoilers, but obviously the idea that the demon basically was kind of insinuating that they hadn't been in a female body before during sex and that they realize now that they prefer it. That was also interesting, kind of new ground as well. Like, it's not the first time in horror for that, but like definitely you leaned into it pretty hard, which was great.
One of the things that I was really excited about that we kind of slipped in later, like I think it was like closer to during production, was that whole speech that Asa gives when he's sitting with her before the shit really hits the fan. And one of the lines I was really proud of was him saying the future is female. And I thought, like, what a great like way to subvert how the sensibilities that we've now become accustomed to, thanks to the Me Too movement, thanks to, just the opening up of all these new voices, to be able to put that in there and for some asshole to come in and weaponize that was so exciting for us. We were just like, ooh, even when Judah said it, like after we were done, he went like, ooh, that felt so creepy. And it was like, we're onto something here.
So YouTube watchers, you're not having a stroke. This interview is coming back a day later with more time with Joe. That's why his appearance looks different. His t-shirt has changed. His hair is even funkier. So yeah, that's what's going on, because Joe's a good man and wants to continue, and that's what we're gonna do. And we're still in the non-spoiler section. So here's the question. Heather Graham, it's great casting. And there's something really like salacious with a script like this, in which an actor has to have multiple personalities. Like, actors love this. How did you arrive at Heather Graham, and what was the difficulty for finally getting Barbara, who, started as a producer on the movie, to agree to be in it as well? Because, I mean, come on, if you're really going to do an homage to Stewart, having her in it is just fantastic.
Well, in terms of the cast, that was going to be obviously the make or break for this. It was Barbara who at the time was only going to be a producer, and she said that right up front, which was fine, and I respected that. But when she had suggested Heather, I was excited when Barbara mentioned that. Everybody immediately goes to Boogie Nights. And I mentioned this before. I think I mentioned this in our Beyond Fest Q&A, but I tend to remember the darker side of Boogie Nights. Once the 80s hits in that movie, obviously the shit hits the fan, and the rose-colored glasses of the 70s, those heart-shaped ones, those come off, and we get to see the consequential character arcs kind of come to full fruition. And there's that moment in the limo when Jack Horner is shooting we're going to make cinema history right here on videotape. And there's a moment where, the kid that we very briefly see in the beginning of the film, who's giving her the blowjob gesture, he comes back, and there is a look, Jeff, that I still, like, thinking about it now, it haunts me to this day. And anybody who was a fan of Heather's from License to Drive and a lot of the stuff that she was doing more as a teenager and a young adult, she grew up fast in that moment. There were so many sides to what she could do, but at the same time, no matter who it was, I wanted to make sure very, very much up front that she was on the same page as us. So we sent the script over, we let her mull it over for a little bit, and then we heard back, well, she wants to meet you over Zoom. 15 minutes later, I remember her, she's going like, I think we're going to do this movie together. I'm like, I think we are. Holy shit.
That's awesome.
And then,
it's great that you focused on the limo scene from Boogie Nights. The Cinematheque last spring did a
70 millimeter one. Oh,
yeah. And it was gorgeous. But like, I was reminded of that scene when I'd watched it, because I hadn't seen it in a couple years again. And it's interesting because she goes feral. That's what she does. Whatever pent up anger she had about anything in her character's life in that moment, she takes out on this guy, as she rightly should. He was being a dick. And honestly, no one's harnessed that emotion out of her really since, until a movie like this, in which there's not an anger there. This is a demon possession, but she's evil and she is overcome. And it's great to see that was something that kind of rang in your mind, that she would be great for horror. Because so many directors out there just, they'll think Boogie Nights, they'll think, oh, erotic thriller only, or something like that. And even here, like, you guys, you kept it very respectable. I'm sure you had an intimacy coordinator. So
no, we didn't. We didn't have an intimacy coordinator.
Really?
I wanted to make sure that everybody was comfortable on set. And I've had situations before recently where, when an intimacy coordinator is involved, I've had actors say to me, it's like, do we really need them? And I'm sitting there saying like, yes, like I want to make sure that everybody's completely comfortable. And in this case, I knew that, to me, I think the best environment for this situation, especially these situations, especially when it comes to intimacy scenes, is as few people on set as possible. That was something that I remember reading about with Wild at Heart, when David Lynch made that movie, where, I think it was just Nicolas Cage and Laura Dern and Lynch as the cameraman. And that, to me, is as closed a set as you can to make sure that there is, obviously protection, consent, but also you are still trying to harness chemistry.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, but sometimes there is nothing worse than having someone who's, leering over set. Now they're doing their job and rightfully so, but there's still another body present and it does objectify the situation a little bit. So, it was brought up. My producers were like, do you want one? I'm like, you know what? I want to make sure that everyone on the cast is comfortable. So we went to every single one of them. And this is after I had done a 32-page document on every single detail that you could bring up now and it was sent to all their lawyers, all their managers, their reps. So they knew. I did storyboards for every one of those scenes so that they knew I wasn't going to throw them for a loop and go like, actually, and pull a basic instinct. And I asked them, I said, how do you feel about an intimacy coordinator? And the three that were in the throes of that the most were Judah and Jonathan. And all three of them said, no, we're good. Like as long we trust
that's all that matters.
You.
I mean, if
exactly.
If the actors sign off on it and they're comfortable, that's all that matters, because that's what an intimacy coordinator's for. Flip side, I would tell you, for some of the lower independent films that are made out there, it's a good idea because it gets people on the same page that might not have the wealth of experience of some of the people in this movie, and it makes sure that directors don't get out of control and ask for things that weren't agreed to. But I mean, this cast and you as director, I get it. Like it makes sense. And your sex scenes, I mean, it's interesting. Like, we're not in the spoilers yet, but like it does play into your title. It plays into the concept of demonic possession because it's a spirit taking over a body and they want it for the feel of flesh and they want to do bad things with the flesh. So I mean, at the same time, you didn't turn this into a Skinamax movie by any means. If anything, you showed more restraint, I think, than people were expecting. And I don't say that as a dig in any way, but like you really actually didn't dive that forward into the sex beyond the fact that it was something that the demon wanted and that it was allowing these characters to experience sex in new ways, because her husband comments to, the Heather Graham character after they've had sex. This is not really what I consider a huge spoiler, but it's different than anything he's ever experienced before with her. And so, of course, like that makes sense because she's possessed. It's brilliant casting. So, I mean, like, kudos to you for going outside the box, because even with your investors, when you say Heather Graham in a horror movie, they're still probably going to be scratching their heads sometimes because but that's not what she knows for. And it's great to get people out of pigeonholes.
I've been really lucky with all of the casting that I've done in all of my movies in one form or another, like Salma Hayek with Everly and Steven and Samara with Mayhem in particular, even Henry Rollins in Wrong Turn 2, where when you present them with an opportunity to stretch in a genre, now take Mayhem, for example, Steven was literally still working on Walking Dead when he was doing that movie, but this was the ability to have a little fun and be more comedic when Glenn was not funny at all. No offense to him, but it was just something different for him. For Salma, it was, she had always played, the Mall, or she had always been like, the tough as nails kind of supporting character, but nothing like that. And with Suitable Flesh, I think Heather really, I remember even her saying like, I've never really done like a horror movie like this before. And when you get that opportunity to present them with something that they can stretch a little bit, she got really excited over the possibilities. And, I wanted to just mention with the way that, like, the whole Skinamax of it all, one thing that I was very specific about when it came to the aesthetics of it. And this was something that I was really excited about from a story standpoint, because it actually parlayed into the visuals. Was Heather is telling this story, which is very Lovecraftian. You have a character in a story telling another story, which constitutes a flashback. If she was of the age that she was in and she was growing up and sex for her was born very much like all of us, influenced by some of the media and some of the entertainment that we've seen in the past, she would have seen a lot of those movies, or she would have seen like, a lot of the 80s and 90s films. So that's where like the color palette changed a little bit. We went for slightly more flat lighting, more romantic lighting in certain ways, but also this is her story. She's not going to visualize herself being as naked as the men in the film. And that was something that like I had to kind of put on my queer hat a little bit and go, what would it be like if we objectified the men men a little more than the women in this case. I, again, made sure that everybody was aware of it. I explained to both Judah and Jonathan, the kind of twink and bear dynamic. They got really excited about that because they're like, well, that makes sense, because with Jonathan, and this kind of goes into his casting, the way it was written, he was kind of a schlub. He was more of an everyman Paul Giamatti type. Sorry, Paul. That's just how it was written. And I'm like, well, first off, I got to make it realistic that whoever marries a Heather Graham type is going to seem aesthetically like they are on the same level, visually and physically. So Jonathan was like a perfect specimen for that. And then I also needed the dichotomy of, and I've had some people criticize the film for this in a good way, where they're like, why would she ever think of leaving Jonathan Sheck, or that character for this kid? And, there are two sides of the coin when you're dealing with the grass is greener on the other side.
Sorry to interrupt. We're getting slightly into spoilers. And the only thing I'll say that, again, is not a big spoiler for a demon possession movie is that she's not making this decision of free will. She's under a spell. That's the only way that you could look at it.
But there is the impetus of like that. There's that scene in the beginning when they're in the bed together and, she's fantasizing about this kid. There is a complacency to their relationship. It was important for me to have that really goofy scene with the fish because I just wanted to see them laugh together. You have the mechanics and the necessity to set up that she's talking about this kid and how she's kind of obsessed with him. And he's a case, not a person, but a case. I wanted to set him up as the doting wife that you normally see in film noir, or like the Anne Archer character from Fatal Attraction.
You did. It was a good role reversal.
Then I needed to have her have this moment where she's got both of those men in bed, because that, to me, I think, at least from a more carnal sensibility, that's what kind of gets her from her car to the house and gets her to like investigate more. I needed to have both of those men in her bed at that moment for at least us to kind of make that decision. I like when people go, "What are you, crazy?" I mean, that's good. That means that they're engaging in it.
Well, so all right, I want to get out of spoilers as soon as I can here.
Okay.
So,
all right.
I got two last questions. What was something that you would say that was important about your prep, and did you have rehearsal time?
So rehearsal time, you're looking at it. It was like 5 or 6 Zoom calls that we had with the main cast. And we did it once we locked in all of our mains, Heather, Judah, Bruce, Jonathan, and then finally Barbara. That was where I prefer rehearsals to just be icebreakers. We go over lines here and there and stuff like that. And then, or individually, I'll work with them, or like in smaller groups. Once everybody got to Mississippi, then I was having more singular meetings with Heather and Barbara, or Jonathan and Heather. I tried to keep Judah out of it a little bit because I wanted him to be this kind of alien force, that he would be this force to be reckoned with later on, and drop him into scenes, which he really liked and respected. Same with Bruce. But it was about 5 or 6 Zoom calls. And funny enough, it was more just to kind of let everybody get comfortable with each other. And also we started talking about the entity. And the fact that, and this is where we delve into cosmic horror a little bit. Cosmic horror is known as something that is fear of the unknown, right? Other dimensions, other spectral beings, whatever. But a lot of times it's what you don't see that's really scary. And the fact that, again, not to give too much away, I know we're good, like delving into spoilers a little bit here, but what was great was watching all of these actors construct this thing organically amongst them. Because the other thing too is we wanted to make sure that it was always very clear to the audience until the very end who was who. Because again, this was her story, right? Like she shouldn't be confusing her friend when she's telling this story, what's happening here. That happens later on. But for us, it was so amazing just kind of sitting back and watching all of the actors just go, well, what if we do this? What if like one of them had like a crink in their hand? They're starting to take pictures of their hand, or we started coming up with dialogue. Like Dandy was never in the script, but we were thinking like, here's a thing, this person that has been absorbing language over a very long period of time. Some of the vernacular that it is going to be bringing to the table at this point in modern times could be a little more old fashioned. No one's been using dandy very long, and he doesn't say lol, or it doesn't say lol or whatever, but it was all those little tells that every time that they would come up with something, I'm in the background either kind of going like, I can't believe this is my cast, or going, oh my God, that's really good. I got to write that down. And then we would incorporate it into the script later on. That was the main goal for the rehearsals, was to just make everyone comfortable enough that they could feel like they could collaborate with each other. And they did every day.
That's great. And you mentioned storyboards earlier. Did you have like a storyboard period of time? Did you board the whole movie or just specific sequences?
I knew because because we had very little time and very little budget, and I knew that I wanted to do a lot of stylistic things that take time to set up and that you can't just discover when you're on set. Certain transitions in the film, certain gags, certain set pieces, they need, especially for when it comes to special effects and particular camera work, I needed to make sure that everybody on the set knew exactly what the frames were going to be every day. Now, I'll be the first person to tell you, I am the worst illustrator in the world. My stick figures are great, but then that usually doesn't really help the cause. I'm a terrible illustrator, but I am a fantastic tracer. So there's this program called Procreate on the iPad.
Yeah.
And what you can do is you can take a digital photo, you can put it into Procreate, and you can draw over it. So it was me and my partner before we even got to Mississippi, and we're taking pictures of each other and layering onto each other and putting it into the 2-3-5-1 frame. And that's how I was able to, really in a very detailed form, do exactly what I wanted to do with the shot, putting in cool arrows and everything and like replicating certain shots, but being able to walk on set and go, here. And we didn't do the whole film because I also love to have those moments of discovery where
that's great.
You walk on a set, because a lot of this, it was a mix of practical sets, like locations, and there was some sets that were made. Some of those sets needed to know exactly how I was going to shoot, like, the transition shot going in from one room to another with it, where it changes like day and time. They needed to know that wall had to fly away. So I had to show them that, or certain violent scenes, or certain scenes that have vehicular damage. Everyone needed to know exactly where those shots were and when.
Well, we'll talk about the vehicular damage.
Oh yeah.
That's on the list.
More than any other film that I've done, this one was heavily storyboarded for all those moments. And on the Blu-ray, when it eventually comes out, I actually personally did a storyboard to film comparison, so you could at least see that this is what we started out with a couple changes here and there. But that is just a complete testament to how the crew was so much in sync with what we did that we were just completely in simpatico when it came to finally executing those moments.
That's great. What was your budget and schedule? That's our last non-spoiler question.
Budget I can't talk about.
Under
but let's
five,
just say,
over five.
Oh yeah, under five. Okay. Very under five. And then the schedule was 19 days.
19 days. Wow.
19 days.
Come back for any pickups?
Nope.
Wow.
The only pickup that we had, and this happens all the time on every shoot, is that there was a shot of curtains that needed to go up in flames. And I am the biggest proponent against CG flame. I hate it. It always looks fake. It always, like, for some reason, it always looks like slow motion. It just never feels like in the moment. But because of those storyboards, I storyboarded that very particular moment that you see in the film. So we knew exactly what elements we needed. And if you know visual effects enough, it's all about comping. It's all about plating. So we made sure that the lighting on the set was flickering so that it would replicate the look and the reflection of light. We had smoke in the shot, because if we try to put that stuff in after the fact, it's going to look fake. But I needed real curtains flaming up. So we left this practical location, and of course we couldn't light this actual building on fire because it was a historical monument, and no one told us that until we were actually on set, and they go, "Oh, by the way, you can't spill blood anywhere." We're like, "Wow, are you fucking kidding me? Did you read the script?" So all of a sudden, all of us are putting plastic all over the walls for certain moments. But the curtain shot just kept getting pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed to the point where it was our very last shot of the last day. And I don't like to yell on set. I think, you have to be positive, try to bring positive vibes every day on set. I make the whole crew go huzzah, just to kind of remind us. It's like that Tarantino thing where he's like, "What are we doing? We're making movies." And they all collectively cheer. That day was a day that I had to somewhat forcibly tell a producer that I know, because it's usually the way where someone goes like, "Don't worry, we'll just shoot it back home. We'll get it in post." We're not going to get that one in post, guys. I guarantee you it. So I had to actually pull my phone out and say, "Hold on, let me record this. Tell me that we're actually going to get this shot." And they were like, and like, to their credit, we had a schedule. We had to finish that, and we had to wrap out of that location. We lost all our actors, but they saw how dedicated I was, that I needed that moment, and they knew it too. We probably weren't going to get it. And that was literally the last shot of the film is curtains going up in flames. And we all did a little dance outside too. So it was worth it.
I want to be conscious of time, but just tell me briefly, how could you possibly light anything on fire inside a historic monument?
That's what I said. They knew that we needed that stuff.
So you were able to just tape things off behind it or something so the fire wouldn't spread? Or how the hell would you even do that?
The last shot, though, was actually just curtains on a C-stand, and we lit it up outside. It was all outdoors, and we just
you were filming
a
plate. Essentially,
that's exactly what it was. It was just a plate, but I knew that if we gave that to visual effects, that they were probably going to have something in After Effects and put that in, and I was going to go, that looks like crap. So I'm glad we got it.
Well, so podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify, YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page who have noticed Joe's hair change, press pause if you have not yet seen Suitable Flesh, and then come back after you see it, because you can see it right now. It's on VOD today, and it's also in theaters. And then if for some reason you missed this window, you could see it on Shudder starting January 2024. But show support to independent horror cinema. Go see it in theaters or rent it on VOD. And so we're going to get into the spoilers now. You have been warned. Right. So this is a tricky one, but I want to hear about it. Dennis has sole credit, and you've mentioned doing rewrites. And so were you doing rewrites with Dennis? Were you shooting scripts back and forth that you just weren't getting credit for? Or were you giving Dennis notes for rewrites? And is there anything you want to tell me about that part of the development process now that we can speak freely about it?
Dennis and I, and all of us, including Barbara, my writing partner, was giving contributions to me to pass along. But for the most part, any of the notes that we had before we left for Mississippi were done by Dennis. But I am always of the mind of when you cast it, when you start getting to location, when you start to figure out what your resources are, you're always going to want to massage that script to be able to benefit what your parameters are. And once we got to Mississippi and we realized like, oh, okay, well, this location doesn't work. And well, now we got this actor. And oh, what about this? What if we had this kind of late addition to it? Was the idea that in Reanimator, because now we're in spoiler world, this film is tethered to Reanimator and From Beyond in a way, but very much Reanimator, where it's the same hospital from Reanimator. It's the Miskatonic University, even down to the same shot, which is actually, it's in Los Angeles, which blew my mind. When we were trying to pick all these little Easter eggs into it organically, not to be too egregious. So if you've never seen Reanimator before, you're not going to go like, what does this mean? But I'm like, well, what if the security guard who works there now, his dad was the same security guard from Reanimator? It kind of means that like, man, he didn't really learn from his old man, but I was like, well, let's make Mace Jr. And it's a very little nod or whatever, but those are things that we kind of came up with organically as we went. And then, so when we got to Mississippi, I was told by my producers, it's like, well, Dennis is on something else right now. I'm like, okay, well, someone's got to do this. And this has always happened to me, Jeff, on every film. There's always the director's pass. And I am always respectful to the writers, whether it's myself or obviously it's other writers. So what I always do is we make these changes. We get all the notes and everything, and the actors are always going to have ideas, and, production is always going to come up with either better ideas or, well, we got to make lemonade out of this location, so why don't we do this or that? And usually, because we didn't have much time for prep, we had 5 weeks of prep, which is not a lot of time. And I'm in a new town, a new crew. A lot of times it was, I would collect all the notes throughout the week, and then I would send those notes to Dennis so he knew. So I got his blessing, but ultimately I was the one with the final draft document, and I was doing it as we went. It was always making sure that Dennis was in the loop for all of it. And like even down to the incantation, it just said they chant this phrase. And now there is no one else I know that knows more about H.P. Lovecraft and the Lovecraftian language than Dennis. And I remember over the weekend, I'm working on the latest draft, and I go, oh my God, we don't have an incantation. And it's not like I can't have them just kind of go like, or just make it up. I needed the actors to know what it was. That's a good example of on Saturday morning, I email Dennis and say, what is the incantation? I don't want to make it up, and I know you know it better than anybody else. And then by the end of the day, he went through all of his Lovecraft research books and came up with this Shigarath Kamag, Fatagan Kamag, Ia Kamag, which was the bane of my actor's existence because all of them did their best to say it very much like they had to. Bruce had the hardest time. It was always Shigarth, Kumug. Bruce, you gotta say it like this. But long story short, we were always in communication. But when it was boots on ground, I was the one who was doing that. And it felt like, and again, I was always taking the essence and what Dennis had done. And I felt like I'm not really changing anything. I'm just evolving it and pushing it through in a way that, because this actually happened to me on another film when I was I think it was for Knights of Badassdom. And anytime that we wanted changes, the writers who were also the producers, sometimes they weren't there. And we needed those changes done now. We needed it done that night. And they didn't come in. I was sitting there with my thumb up my ass going, guys, I need to do this. I think it's something that like I was always respectful of from the beginning. And as a writer myself, like I would tell them, this is what I'm doing. Are you cool with it? We would always send drafts to Dennis and we always heard back like, okay, or get a thumbs up or whatever. And I don't think he was ever pissed about it.
Look, you know what you're doing, in which you weren't trying to get in there as a arbitration and claim credit. So it's like on this case, it's totally fine. And on any case where you're going back and forth with your writer and your end objective isn't to get a writing credit, you're just tweaking it with your writer's consent, it's fine. Unfortunately, for the rest of the world that doesn't always have Joe on their side, you know, writers do need to be careful when a director is doing stuff like that, because it gets very sticky if a director then tries to take credit and or sole credit. Sometimes they try and do.
See, I know those tricks too. I've seen it done before, you know, where someone is literally counting words and trying to make sure that the percentage is exactly where it is. I told everyone from the get-go, it's like, I am the director here. And now it is a game of telephone where I'm now being passed on to this message and now it's going through me. And I want everyone to know that, especially because of the time and money that we had, we couldn't wait around. These changes needed to be made almost on the spot, but always with respect to what Dennis was always doing at all times. And he was always,
and that's the way to do it. So for our podcast listeners who have skipped into the spoiler section, but haven't seen the movie, the only primer that I'll give you, it's a demon possession movie. Elizabeth is Heather Graham's character. Asa comes in. It's her new patient. He says his dad's trying to kill him. She doesn't believe him. He says that sometimes he's taken over. She witnesses him twitch and be taken over after a phone call from his dad. He has a personality disorder change in her mind. But really, it's the beginning of really the dad transferring into Asa and possibly seeking out a new victim from Asa onward, because it's a world where demons do exist. And so what's fun about the movie is that this is a demon that's hopping bodies back and forth, as we've already discussed. And there's an interesting tone here, just briefly, because I have a lot of other questions. You're trying to do right by Stuart Gordon's vision from his other movies and your own, and have a sense of humor along with horror. But there's horrific acts in the movie. Talk about just balancing that tone, because it continues to have the darkness that it needs when it needs it. It's hard because if you make it too funny, people won't take the horror seriously. I love horror comedy, by the way, but sometimes it's at the detriment of what horror fans still want, which is something good, dark, and creepy that isn't always for a laugh. So what were your challenges with that?
The biggest challenge was making sure that there was an anchor. And a lot of times when it comes to horror comedy, the anchor sometimes gets loosened because the actors are in on the joke. I think that that's one of the things that I actually learned from Airplane, was that everybody in that film is taking it deadly serious. And that's what makes it funny.
Absolutely.
Is that no one is winking at all. And it's funny, we just, and I'll keep this brief, but we screened Reanimator at the Nighthawk in Brooklyn, literally the night after our premiere. And watching those two films back to back, and I've seen that movie a lot of times, so I know it front to back, but watching it with an audience, the audience was cackling. Now, they had seen the movie before, so they knew what to expect, but they were cackling like we were watching The Hangover. It was amazing. And I think that was tonally the thing that I've siphoned the most from Stuart, was that he was always allowing the audience to giggle about some of the absurdity of the situation. But as long as you keep the characters in the film playing it straight to almost to the point where it's practically deadpan, that kind of emotional anchor allows you to aesthetically step back and go, this is absolutely batshit crazy. Honestly, that's the biggest thing that I learned from a lot of the splatter movies from the 80s, was that life is a tonal roller coaster. And today is a horror movie. Tomorrow's a romantic comedy. Next week could be a spy thriller. Who knows? But as long as you have the characters have a grounded consistency and they play out the situations without a wink to the camera, that's where I felt like I would be able to get away with the stakes that were involved, especially in the horrific moments. Because if you don't have those, and if you're winking at the audience, then they're just looking at the gags. They're not caring about, oh my God, like Heather is watching this kid behead their father. The head comes to life and starts talking to her. At one point, this is really funny. At one of the takes, she laughed. And I went like, we got to do that again. She's like, I know, but it's so crazy. I'm like, I know that. But you know what? If you were really in this moment and not being taken out of it by production over and over again, this would be the most horrific thing you've ever seen. That's how we have to play it. And if you play it like that, you can get away with that moment of too much, which was a moment that we organically found when we were rehearsing. Because I think one of the actors even said, or mentioned something like that. And I went, that's really good. Like, and that's almost like us kind of commenting the situation, like, is this too much? But Stewart would always play that very seriously. And that was kind of the archetype that we wanted to play into at all times.
Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You could read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. And folks, we are working on issue 50 and we are so proud of this. And as we're coming into the holidays, I hope you remember that you could get someone a gift subscription to Backstory Magazine. So it's very easy to do. It's all in the same checkout cart. So keep it in mind for the storyteller in your life. But if you've never read us before, you could test drive us by reading our free issue. That's right, an entire issue. That's free. And I hope you'll want to subscribe. And if you do, I'm here to sweeten the deal. You could use discount coupon code SAVE5. That's save and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. So folks, there's tons of great content already active in issue 49.5, but we are working on issue 50. So I would love to have you join us for the 50th issue of Backstory Magazine and have you support my passion project. So thanks to all the podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page for considering becoming subscribers. It really means a lot to me. But now let's jump right back into our interview with director Joe Lynch about his latest film, Suitable Flesh, which you could watch right now on VOD, or in January, you could get the Blu-ray, which will have bonus features all over it, or watch it streaming in Shudder, but it's available right now for you, so you don't even have to wait that long. Thanks for supporting independent horror cinema as well. There's a great setup that I haven't really seen in a lot of these movies, in which the demon decides to try and take over her body successfully, chains itself to a pole in a basement, knowing that Heather's character will be trapped in his body, chained to a pole, so he can't do anything. And he's just playing with her because he knows how to get out of the pole and the handcuffs, and he'll be back on his own. And I thought it was a great setup because you have this very suspenseful element going for Elizabeth, chained to a pole in a basement, knowing that the demon's now around her husband, living out her life, acting as her. And she's able to get to a phone to call Barbara Crampton's character. And she comes over, which is also a cool topper to the scene. What could you tell us briefly about the evolution of that scene? Because it was one of the cooler kind of non-special effect aspects of body swapping seen in the movie that I thought was just brilliant. I mean, you get into the special effects of it all by the end.
There's no special effects in those scenes. Honestly, that was one of my favorite days of shooting, even though we shot roughly about 20, 25 pages all in that one scene. And we had to shoot it in a way where we shot every single scene going one way and then every single scene going the other way. And that's one of my favorite scenes because it's just two people in the situation. That was always in Dennis's script, that all of that sequence. The only thing that changed a little bit was some of the dialogue. And like one of my favorite kind of dark jokes that I slipped in there was our safe word was ow. I cackle every time because we are kind of commenting on how sexual relations and body autonomy and, you know, all of that have been not exploited, but they've been.
Yes, but you're talking about when it goes to her husband and the demon with Heather Graham. Asa chained up, and Heather Graham in Asa's body is just a great scene. What is it in the corner? It's a dead cadaver.
I'll be very quick with that. That was our effects guy, Greg McDougall. We always had bones written in the script so that we would at least show that there is some kind of Lovecraftian Cthulhian shit going on, you know, that there is a world outside of this one tale, that the entity has been sacrificing things to Cthulhu, what have you. And in the script, it said, there's a pile of bones. And I'm like, pile of bones? That's kind of weird. And Greg called me up the night before and goes, you know, I have this melted body that I've been kicking around for the last couple of years. Do you want me to bring it to set? I'm like, yes, bring it to set. That'd be great. And he brought it to set. It looked like something Rob Bottin kind of threw out when he was making the thing. It was just this gooey, gross thing. And I'm like, less is more. We throw it in there. We don't really make a meal out of it and let the audience discuss what that could be. But I wanted to really shape a lot of these scenes out of kink and fetish. And even the handcuffs are actually the same exact, not the same exact ones, but the same model that they used in Mike Flanagan's Gerald's Game. There's something somewhat dangerous and kinky about that whole scenario. And the fact that the movie does delve into this idea of losing the power of your body and losing the autonomy of your own flesh. And just thinking about this poor woman is stuck in another person's body, and now someone else is not just taking over her life, but taking over her sexuality is, to me, that's fucking terrifying. That's the stuff of nightmares, but from a real place. That whole scene, all of those scenes, whether it was Judah by himself or then with Barbara, was such a joy to work and watch these actors just chew scenery. It was great.
It was fantastic. Now, something that a lot of people are going to be talking about that was just a showstopper. There's a point in the movie, obviously, where she hypnotizes her patient, knowing that he's dangerous, is hoping that she could actually hypnotize at least the human part of them and make an escape. And they fight, pushes somebody's out the window and is injured, right? And then she runs outside to grab her car. And this is a beautiful sequence in which she is using the car's onboard rear camera to back into Asa multiple times to try and kill him, which is just expert cutting, a great innovative kill that we really haven't seen. And it all comes back to you being an environmentally conscious person buying a Prius many years ago. So tell us that story, because I absolutely love it.
When you're a horror director or a genre director, you start to, like, after Wrong Turn 2, I had this very signature kill that a lot of people enjoyed. You're always wanting to up that or top that, or even just have something that's in your back pocket that you know is like, oh, that's going to be a showstopper. And ever since I bought a Prius back in 2007, I remember the dealer having me sit in the back and drove me around a little bit. And I remember looking at that perspective from the back seat and going, oh my God, how amazing would this be if you killed someone like that? But the thing that solidified it was it had to be in one shot. There had to be no cuts. There had to be no changes of angle. We had to sit on that shot the entire time it happens. The more that you can take away the process from the audience, because the second you cut, the audience goes, oh, we're out of it.
Right.
The more we hang into it, the better. That was a kill that I've had in my back pocket for about 15 years. And I actually tried to do it in another film that I was developing, and it kind of worked. But when this script came along, and now in the story does happen that way, where the entity gets thrown out of a window, and then Edward at the time comes around and stabs the body repeatedly until it gets dragged away. And I'm like, you know what? We can do more than that. And she drove here, didn't she? And she'd probably have a car that has a backup camera. Holy shit, we can do that. And I just felt like it was the perfect opportunity to try to exact that. And thankfully, it was something that I installed into the script right from the jump. That was like one of my first notes was, I really want to try this. And then when I explained it to them, they go, yeah, that maybe we can do that. And it's always been in there. And actually doing it was incredibly tough because we never cut, and it had to be Heather. There was no stunt driver. Heather's in the car. We had sandbags to give her the idea, like where the car stopped. She's not actually hitting the thing. And it's me off to the side going, forward, reverse, forward, reverse, fucking forward, fucking reverse. Like I was screaming, but and I felt bad for all the neighbors because they were probably like, what's going on? We got it in 3 takes. The first time Heather hit the gas so hard and hit the brakes so hard that the camera went, it totally moved. And then after that, when we went to set, a couple days later, I used a GoPro camera and I used that to smash into Judah, and we used it back and forth in reverse. And then we just comped it. The hardest part was actually getting the timing right. I'm glad that I got the plate of her doing it first, because then I was able to use that on the monitor and show exactly when we wanted to stop and then come back again and then stop and come back again. When it came together, Jeff, it was like one of those Barton Fink feeling moments where you're like, yes, yes, yes. But it wasn't until seeing it for the first time with an audience when everyone went, oh, and then, oh my God, again? I wanted to do it 3 times because it's that old Mike Myers thing where it's like, it's funny, it's not funny, it's funny again. I needed to do it 3 times. Plus, there is a motif of 3s in this. So we had to kind of keep going.
The third time is when the possession is complete. So
exactly,
that makes sense. And it's just a beautiful sequence, and it's such an easy special effect. You're just compositing in, as you said, a GoPro camera. So I mean, I
was shocked that no one had done it up to that point. And for years, I've watched a lot of horror movies and a lot of action films and everything, praying anytime someone got in a car with a backup camera, like, oh shit, oh God, oh no. Oh,
it's perfect. But what's the rule here? Because structurally, your film has a bookend in which they're with the cadaver of Asa in the beginning, and then it's told in flashback. This is what brings us back up to reality in the hospital and back into her asking, are we sure it's dead? Are we sure it's dead? What is the rule on killing the demon, do you think? Because backing up all those times, what kept the demon alive? Or is it just not really possible for a human to kill it per se?
In the rule that Dennis, but also also it's alluded to in Lovecraft is that you have to completely destroy the brain or cut the head off. And, all the times that we were inflicting damage onto the body, we were kind of taking liberties like, okay, maybe it hit the neck, it hit the chest, or maybe smushed a little bit here, a little bit there. That's why anytime that there's any kind of cranial damage, like a bullet to the head or cutting the head off completely, even still, sometimes I like the idea. And again, this goes back to cosmic horror that sure, there are rules, but look at the thing. Is there really any rules for the genetic coding of where the thing is going from one body to the other? It's kind of nebulous. And we played with these rules too, even down to the fact that she's on the phone with the entity at one point, and that's how they transfer, or in person. And then the third time, there was a crucial line that we put in that I still don't quite think kind of band-aids over the plot hole, but where Asa goes like, I'm with you at all times now. And I thought like that might be because we had this problem where Heather's character is in a padded cell on like the third floor and the morgue or whatever is probably on the bottom floor. How would the entity be able to say something and it would carry all the way up there? We even tried to find a shot that would be like passing through the hallway and you'd hear it in echo or whatever. And the more we tried to do it, the more it felt like we were ham-fisting in like a rule. So we just kind of left it alone and just, some people pick up on it. Some people don't. I chalk it up to cosmic horror and that's my answer.
It works. And that brings us to the hallway sequence, which is, I think, the most complicated. I'm curious how long it took to shoot. And you have to be really clear because this is body swapping galore. We're going back and forth. You're keeping track of everything. And by the way, I always take notes during movies. You had your gun run out of bullets exactly correctly rather than doing the cheesy thing where it doesn't. So you had a lot of plates spinning in that scene and you kept track of all of them. And it's complicated because you want to confuse the audience a little because there's one final reveal at the end as to did the demon survive or not. Yeah. And so tell us about the challenges of that scene.
It was our final day and everything in the padded cell was the day before, but the entire hallway sequence, all the gags, every scene in that hallway, it was all one day. It was a very long 18-hour day. And because we couldn't leave, we could not leave. We had to wrap that film. We had to wrap the actors. We could not leave that day. Compounded with that, I unfortunately had to play one of the parts because one of the actors who showed up was about 2 feet shorter than Jonah Ray, who we had already cast in the film as the orderly. Right. So I had to step in, and that's the reason why I'm even in the movie. I'm completely blind when I'm in certain scenes, like playing off of everybody. I have no clue what's going on, but then I would run off camera, grab my monitor, and then just continue the thing off. It was one of the most challenging days I've ever had. There was a lot of spinning plates, but I think it was also because we had so much prep before that, down to how many bullets that needed to be there. We used every single frame of film. There is a shot in the film where the camera's upside down and it flips over to reveal Heather. You know what? That was the Steadicam operator who's also our DP. If you know, like Steadicam, you have to flip it over to take a break. So he had pushed record and flipped it over in that moment just to be prepared for the shot. And Heather did that thing. And it was my editor who went, oh my God, we got to use that shot. And it worked out great. It was a great reveal for her. But it was one of the most challenging days I've ever had on set. But it was also, again, a testament to my actors knowing exactly what we needed to do. And that was, you're right. For most of the movie, I wanted to make sure that everybody knew who was who at all times. Here was a moment where we deliberately were trying to fool the audience into thinking like, who is it? Who is it not? Like, we don't know. They don't know. Who knows? It was one of the hardest days because I had to keep track myself of everybody and where they were at all times, because when they would come up to me and say, both actors, both Heather and Barbara went, who am I right now? I don't remember. I'm like, you're that person, to the point where if you go on my Instagram and see the final shot that I had, because I would do like a shot a day for the whole process, I am splayed out on the ground. That was not a posed shot. When we called wrap after we got the curtain shot, I just needed to lay down for 20 minutes. I had never worked that hard in my life, but every ounce of blood, sweat, and tears was all on screen there.
It was a great sequence. I mean, it really is. It's a great way to end the film. You do not disappoint because it really builds to something that complicated. What did you learn about your film and editing? Because editing is the last stage of storytelling. Obviously, because you were employing voiceover, it gave you a few outs in editing that you could change things. Are there any deleted scenes you want to tell us about that'll one day maybe wind up on the Blu-ray?
There is not a drip of a deleted scene or practically a deleted shot that we didn't use. We used, again, every single moment. The thing that I learned the most about it was to improvise. There are certain shots. The perfect example is the backup camera, but then the moment right after. Out of necessity, we only had 30 because I was so focused on getting that backup camera shot. I now ate up about an extra hour of time and I needed to get it right. But now the sun was coming up and we still needed to stab the shit out of Asa. And I had one shot, two takes. That was it. And then I knew that I was going to have, an opposite shot that I needed. So when we got into the edit, I'm like, I have two angles and that's it. I'm screwed. So that was my editor telling me, get the fuck out of the room. And when they went back in, they created this tapestry of just these two shots and created this almost like Lucio Fulci meets Louis Buñuel staccato cutting moment that just intensified. That was all done with just two shots. And that was it. I had a much grander plan, but that would have never happened if I wasn't able to just kind of respect my collaborators, and because I'm an editor myself, respect my collaborators and say, like, there is always room to try new things. Even the voiceover, I knew that we were allowed to use voiceover because that was in the script, but we were changing up dialogue and even going back into the source, into the Lovecraft story, and using words and phrases from the original prose to tether us more into Lovecraft. That was not originally intended. And again, that was stuff that I even asked Dennis. I'm like, hey, just want to let you know, we're going to try these different lines. And he's like, that's a great idea.
That's good. Back to the two shots of the stabbing. So, I mean, what was the difficulty? I mean, like, it was one on her stabbing and the reverse of him being stabbed. Wouldn't that be the basic?
All you need?
Yeah.
In my head, I had other angles and I didn't want to just hang on one shot of her and then one shot. We ended up using the shot of which was a close-up, like a Fulci-esque close-up of the neck. I ended up reframing it so it looked different at all times. But then after that, then I just had this one shot and it was static. So that's where the editor kind of used, and I hate digital zooms, but they were able to use that digital zoom in a way that like made it seem like I was reframing it each time. Sure. So it never got boring. At least to me.
Well, and that helped with the pacing. And then she has it's Heather Graham in feral mode, like we were talking about earlier, when she's doing the stabbing, because she's really losing it. And the force that she's driving the knife down in, it looks great.
Great. Well, then good. Then we did our job.
Well, so, the ending could have gone a lot of different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And you have this end tag where we see Barbara basically smoking, kind of, which is the one thing that the demon loved to do. And that's kind of our tell here. And we see that the demon has survived and that Heather's trapped in a cell. What could you tell us about the ending? Was it always that, or did you play with other ideas?
No, it was always that. I wanted to have a somewhat dark ending because to me, Lovecraft never leaves you in a satisfied sort of situation. Right. So it felt like it was the right ending that Dennis had kind of established. I wanted to have there be like a difference and a bit of a final reveal. That's why we went with the whole vaping thing, which was hilarious, telling Barbara Crampton to vape. She really got dedicated to that. And I also wanted to use that spinning camera as like a motif that people's lives are spinning out of control. That was always on the script. And then it was just a matter of me finding ways to comp that all together. So it felt like one continuous movement, which was not easy, especially with the rig that we were using. We weren't doing motion control. We were using just one rig that someone is manually cranking like they're churning butter, but miraculously it worked.
I mean, it worked great. What was your toughest scene? You talked earlier about literally having panic attacks on a film. What was your toughest scene here? What was the scene where you weren't sure you were going to make your day, or you weren't sure that you had it straight in your head? And how did you creatively rise to that challenge?
The toughest scene to shoot was the extended scene between Heather and Judah, or Bruce Davison, who had to lay on the ground in the building. The reason why was because we had to break that up into 3 days. Mainly because it was just a very complicated scene. There was a lot of emotion going on. And thankfully, Kim, our first AD, recognized that there was going to be an emotional component to these scenes that wasn't going to be something you could just breeze through. Plus, we had arguably our most complex sex scene, and we had two transferences going on at the same time, and we had a beheading. There was a lot of moving parts, and I've been on sets before where I could see that on paper being maybe 1 or even 2 days. And having just done a lot of TV before doing this film, I was already in the mode to tackle 10 pages. This was an 11-page scene, and there was just a lot involved. And even though it was just 3 people, it was also in a practical location. We couldn't fly away any walls. We were stuck in all of these little corners and everything. And we again had to flip the world to the point where we were shooting like everything one way and everything another way, except for the sex scene. That was very important to me to make sure that we closed the set down. We made sure that it was only myself, the two camera operators, and the actors. Even the boom person was like in another room. We wanted to make sure that there was just minimal people on set. And it was just complex to take what's ostensibly maybe an 11 to 12 minute scene, but break it down over 3 days.
Because you're breaking it down to the ceremony, the cult ceremony of the transference.
Yeah.
You're breaking it down to the killing of the father and then the sex that happens afterwards.
There's a transference that happens during the first sex scene, and then it happens again. So now I have actors who are playing two different parts within minutes of each other.
Right.
And a lot of complications happened during that. Everything from the sun was coming up to we had personnel problems, like with crew members that were kind of dropping out on us, unfortunately, which just happens in indie film. It's one of those things you can't control. There was also
really it was a crew issue, right? Because if the sun's coming up and you're at an interior, you just flag off the windows and you keep going. So it's really like people going into their overtime is the problem, right?
Exactly. But also, just even though we were tenting stuff off, you could still have light leak, which we had to kind of paint out in post. We found out that the location didn't allow us to have the proper wood paneling at the bottom to open up the secret hatch at the bottom. That was a huge continuity. Just one of those Murphy's Law moments that you just can't get around, and you have to fight through it. And we had to leave that location. It was not a situation where we could just go, all right, everybody, drop cable. Let's take it another time.
Right.
We'll do it next week. We actually had to go back to that location a week and a half later just to get the shots of Heather running up into the building and then run out of the building. I was told we weren't going to be able to get them, but my producers somehow figured out a way that we would do all the morgue stuff and then literally race over to the house and just get those scenes, just to get the sinew between those moments. That was from a production standpoint. Oh, and also blood everywhere at the end when I was told specifically, oh, wait, you can't bleed and you can't have any blood.
I know you brought that up earlier. So it's like there was blood in the camera shot, but you weren't showing the background. So were you top view looking down so that you could splatter and have it caught on plastic that the camera didn't see?
When we shot one way, everything behind the camera is just, it looks like it's been saran wrapped, everything. Because I told Greg, I'm like, no CG blood. I hate CG blood. This has to be practical.
But how did you handle the stuff behind like the person in the shot? Was it all just props?
When we were shooting it, the blood was geysering out of the stump and Heather's getting covered in blood.
Right.
And it's looking great and everything. I'm like, fuck yeah, blood. And then we flipped the world and we got everything else with Judah where he's getting splattered with blood. It looked like something out of The Shining. It was just blood everywhere. It was great. So then, continuity-wise, we knew that Heather was going to be running out of the house with all this blood on her shirt. And when we were in the edit, and this is what kind of parlays into the toughest scene in post, because the next scene is, and this was exactly how it was written, she goes from the house, she goes to her friend's, she couldn't go home, she's covered in blood. She goes to her friend's office in the hospital, and that's Barbara Crampton. That's her reemergence into the stories, is Dr. Daniela Upton's reintroduction. And we played the scene. Now, this was shot a week and a half later, but continuity had it so that we had to have the blood on her blouse and everything, which is why at one point she even says, like, let me get you a fresh shirt. We put the scene together. And this was something that we didn't realize it until my editor and I, and then the producers, that we all sat down and watched the scene and went, I think they would have reacted, both of them would have reacted differently with the blood on her shirt and the way that she was reacting. It was so severe that she was covered in all this blood that there was no truth in the moment. And we didn't discover that until we had to put it all together in post. So we had some hard decisions to make. We completely recut that scene maybe 3 or 4 times to lessen the impact of the fact that when you have a friend come in and she's covered in blood and Barbara's character is so casual. Now, I can look back at that scene and almost kind of slap myself on the wrist a little bit, because I'm like, well, did I direct it wrong? Did I approach this from a different perspective? Because on paper, it made sense. But when you actually put it on camera and you put everyone in the flesh, and all those components together, it didn't make sense. It just felt like a false note.
Right. Because Barbara is also a psychiatrist and she would be freaking out with her friend in blood. So you basically remove the blood is what you're saying?
Every single shot of Heather with that blouse had to be digitally removed. I mean, it was red. There was blood everywhere. There was even blood on her neck. You know, we didn't do a lot of CG in the film. That's where we used most of the CG
so was
budget.
The assumption
was
that she just changed blouses before she came?
When the head gets ripped off and the blood is spraying everywhere, we just didn't spray we had to erase it off of Heather, and we backed her up enough so it just stays on her, and that there is no immediate emergency assumption that something really bad happened with her, with Heather's character in that moment. That was so tough because I still liked the fact that she came in that way. It just didn't feel true. And I almost didn't want to admit it at first, but the more and more we showed it, and the more and more that even my editors like, I don't know, man, like this doesn't.
Well, yeah, because part of the movie is that Barbara Crampton doesn't believe that something is really going on with her.
Exactly.
So if she walks in with hard evidence of blood, it doesn't make any sense. Did you put a false wall behind the actors that were covered in blood to protect the real walls? Like, how did you handle what was seen in the frame? Because you're still in a historic building.
We just had poor Greg McDougall was behind the stump and shooting all the blood upwards. We walked away from that thing spick and span. There was no cleanup at all. And that's a testament to my art department and us putting everything up. But they were all of a sudden the location manager and the property person showed up and went like, bam. And they were like, no blood anywhere. We're like, are you kidding? What movie do you think we're making? We're not making a fucking romantic comedy here.
Because the only other thing that you could do is shoot it in plates and take it somewhere else. You would get background plates and then you would just blue screen all the blood you want and comp in fake walls, right? That would have been the only other solution.
I was trying so hard to avoid any of that. The only green screen stuff that we did, at least in that area, was Bruce's head when it opens his eyes and he's spouting blood and everything. That was really the only kind of comp I wanted to do. That was a tough one because and they even said, just use CG blood. And I guarantee you, man, blood has gotten really good, in the VFX world. The thing that betrays it, and this is something that I learned on Mayhem. So once I say it, whoever's listening to it, I think they're going to recognize it too. It's about lighting. We've all seen that fake blood that you can get on your phone now that you can put in an app or whatever. But when you see fake blood in film, and the reason why blood works so tangibly as a practical effect is that in and of itself is a reflection model. When you're in a certain space and there are certain lights that are hitting that liquid, it's reflecting that liquid. It's reflecting off of that liquid.
Right.
So when you start messing with that, whether the audience really recognizes that or not, or if it's just something almost subliminal, I immediately notice it. I think a lot of other people immediately notice it. So when the option of using a lot of CG blood, because the advantage is no cleanup. That means you can get to take 2 and take 3 and take 4 really quick. Much to the chagrin of everybody involved, I kept saying, guys, I'm telling you, I know it sucks right now. I know we got to clean up that floor. I know we have to scrub those walls and we have to reset the actors. But there's going to be a moment when we do that and go, hey, fine, let's move on to the second take. And it's going to look like shit. It's going to look fake. I had a very good lesson from Brian Usna when I first met with him right before we shot. We were at the El Coyote and I said, do you have any advice? And he goes, imagine that Stuart was there, like a Jedi ghost or whatever. And he would say, what would Stuart do? And in those moments, I would say, I'm telling you, man, Stuart would not want CG blood. He would want the real thing on set because that is a stage man. That is a theater man. And guess what they don't have on stage? CG blood. We need Todd the shit out of that. And that's what we did.
It only works if you have the money for it. You know what I mean? Because I know people that have done special effects, like the 2 other elements, it's weight. So it's sometimes it seems like it's floating and it's not going.
Yeah. It's
gravity, right? Yep. So gravity, and then it's coloration. So I know people that have done it. They have to match the filters that you were shooting with. If you shot with filters for your color timing, and then a little bit of lighting, like you said, was the other element. But CG blood's maybe okay for a headshot.
Since we're in spoiler land, the shots of the head of Asa's body getting shot, those are CG. We actually, well, to be fair, those are splats that we shot as comps against the green screen and then we comped it in. I am a big Tom Savini fan. There is no one better than Tom Savini when it comes to bullet hits and squibs. Look at Day of the Dead is one of the most beautiful examples of blossoming headshots ever committed to cinema. That's what I wanted. I wanted those big, shocking splats. It goes from nothing to blood splat and a Jackson Pollock painting in 2 frames. when we were on set, this was one of the detrimental moments of that 18-hour day was for Greg, again, a one-man effects team. He had this whole thing set up for Judah to have it like this device that we were going to do as like a mini guacamole gun that was an air-pressured cannon instead of a squib, so he could be safe. And I've used them before too. And in most cases, they work great. We had 2 takes and that was it because we had to move on. And both takes were just like, it was heartbreaking. I walked away from that whole day. That was the one moment that I went like, oh no, what are we going to do? And thankfully, Jason Miller, our visual effects producer, painstakingly figured out a way to pump it using real blood. And we just cut frames out. We just literally cut frames out of the splat. And that's what gives you that effect. But it's the only time in the whole film that I believe that we used CG blood as a comp.
And you were able to use your original footage? You didn't need to put them on a green screen? You were able to use the failed air compression?
What's on there is literally covering over the little very putrid that went on there. We covered it completely with gore.
Well, inversely, the hospital corridor, that was a set that you had plenty of blood in, and that was like stage blood as well. So you were fine there. So you got your blood and you got to drink it too. What's next? What are you working on next that you want to tell us about?
I have been 24/7 promoting the movie because no one else can right now. It's been really hard, but at the same time, this is something that I learned from my mom whenever I would go like, oh God, I have to do this interview and I have to do that. I got to talk to Jeff. Then she would kind of stop me and say like, no, you get to talk to Jeff. And it's true because I have been a fan for so long. So this is a dream come true for me. And thank you for that, Jeff. I've been burning the candle at both ends, trying to get the word out and everything. We've been doing the Fleshtival tour. So that's really where my brain has been. But right after this movie comes out, I'm getting right back to writing. There's a project that I'm working on now that I'm so excited about. And it's been a minute since I had my last script produced. The first one that was actually produced was Everly, which made the blacklist that we made and everything, which was great. And I've been kind of in rewrite mode for a while. And it's been a while since I've actually had like an original screenplay that I've generated. My writing partner and I are working on something now that is really exciting. And look, I love the horror genre. At the same time, I always love mixing the genre a little bit. Like the last couple movies, someone's like, you're back from horror. I'm like, never really left. It's just that I like to kind of pepper in some of the genre stuff that I've always loved and peter it in. There's also a script. I shouldn't talk about this, but screw it. One of my favorite writers is Joe Hill. Stephen King is the reason why I am who I am. When I was 5 years old, our house was broken into and the robber took everything in the house except for a hardcover copy of Christine. So while my mother was on the phone calling 911, I started reading the book and I was literally, it was like 5 or 6 and I was just soaking it all in. I loved it. And Stephen King changed my life in that way.
Christine's Too Scary for Robbers is great. Or the robber had already read it.
Exactly. It was like, not for me. I'll wait for the movie. I will not leave this earth until I do a Stephen King adaptation at one point. But Joe Hill is one of my favorite writers. I've been following him since 20th Century Ghosts. And I'm not going to say which one it is.
Right.
But there is a story in 20th Century Ghosts that my writing partner and another friend of mine and myself are adapting that I've had the rights to for a couple of years now. And we've kind of going back and forth on it, but we're almost finished with it. And it is so unlike what you would expect from what I've done in the past. And it's my passion because it combines two of my favorite things, which is, and this might give it away. So if you know 20th Century Ghosts, you might go, oh, I know which one it is. It combines two things. It combines a hangout movie and a making of movie. That's all I'm going to say. But it is a passion of mine to get this movie made. And we're so close to finishing that draft. And then after that, then I'm going to do this kind of horror hybrid, kind of bent on music a little bit. Not quite Phantom of Paradise, but close to it. And honestly, just doing this is a gift. It really is a gift. So I want to cherish every step of the way. And right now, I just can't wait to finish the film promotion so I can get back into that final draft document.
That's awesome. Well, look, it's been great having you on the show. Number 38, as we have to refer to you as.
Yes.
And, thanks for coming on and thanks for being so generous with your time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeff. This was an honor.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to director Joe Lynch for being so generous with his time today in discussing his latest film, Suitable Flesh, which, by the way, folks, you could get on VOD right now, or you could see it, I think, still in theaters. And you could also wait for it if you want, but why wait? It's coming out on Blu-ray with a bunch of cool bonus features in January 2024, and it will also be on the streaming service Shudder. But really, it was great to have Joe on the podcast today, and it's always fun to interview someone who was listening to my podcast before they even made their first film, and to have them eventually in the podcast. It's just a treat, I tell you. And it it was a blast to interview Joe. But hey, while I still have your attention, and I hope you do, we are working on issue 50 of Backstory Magazine, and I really hope you'll join us for it. You could still read issue 49.5. It's live right now, but Backstory Magazine, if you've never read us, you could test drive us by reading a free issue at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. And it would really mean a lot to me to have you support independent film journalism. So for my podcast listeners in iTunes and Spotify, and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where these Zoom interviews go, so you could see us talking, it would really mean a lot to me to have your support for my passion project. And to sweeten the deal, I'm here to give you a discount coupon code of SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2023. All rights reserved. Folks, if you ever want to drop me a line, you could do so at backstoryletters@gmail.com, or you could reach out to me through the social medias that I'm a part of. So that would be at Yo Goldsmith on Twitter, also known as X, or at Yo Goldsmith on Instagram. And you could also find at backstory_mag on both Twitter and Instagram. Or you could try my Facebook fan page on Facebook. It's an easier way to interact that way. There's plenty of ways to get me. If I don't respond immediately, forgive me. I will get back to you. Issue 50 is taking up a lot of time, but I always want to hear from you. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.